Glad you could get in. So good to see you again. We've been talking with Kai and everything, and looking forward to talking to you about Henry George and so forth. And so good to see you, Andrew. We had a great time that night.
Glad you invited me up here.
Oh, it's my good pleasure. I enjoyed our talk after that talk you gave at St. Mark's and so forth. And in the audience, welcome very much. Welcome to the program, Andrew Mazzone. He's the chairman of a major corporation. At the moment, it's called Exponent.
It's called Exponent, but it's not major. It's a small R&D company. I used to be CEO of a Fortune 500 company in my younger days.
What was that company?
And it was part of the Perkin-Elmer family of companies.
Okay.
The company that put the space telescope into and developed the human genome.
And you were CEO of that?
Of one of the subsidiaries.
One of the major. Okay, yes. But it's major in the sense that it's got a very interesting technology involved. We're going to talk some about that. But then perhaps more relevant to what we're going to talk about on this program is he's involved with he's an exponent of the Henry George School of Economic Theory.
I teach there, yes.
Or he teaches there, and he's a very good spokesman for it, understands it. We're going to be talking largely about that within the context of the world economy problems we have now. And Andrew, welcome really very, very much to conversation.
Okay, I'm glad to be able to talk about it.
Well, it's good to welcome you.
Henry George as opposed to business in this session.
All right, very good. But could you share just a little bit of your own background? Born, raised, educated a little bit.
From Boston, a little town called Needham, Mass. Came to New York at 16, and I went to Rhodes Prep here.
Rhodes Prep is a prep school?
It was a prep school, private school. It's no longer active in New York. And I went there nights, worked during the days, and then I went into the Army.
You were here at 16 with your family?
No, by myself.
By yourself? You had left the family?
I left home, yes, to seek my fortune in the Big Apple.
Well, I'll be darned.
Well, I've made it and lost it a number of times.
Did you keep track with your family?
Oh, sure.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh,
sure.
Yeah. No, I just needed to. Yeah, New York was the center and Mecca, and I'd.
You got an entrepreneurial spirit about you.
Well, more or less, hopefully.
Like how Columbus going on.
I don't know that good. Yeah. But then I.
How did you get to the school, the prep school?
Oh, I had looked it up, and I had friends that had attended back from Needham, so I knew I could go nights and work during the day, which I did.
Okay.
And then I was in the Army for 3 years, and then.
Were you officer or enlisted?
I was enlisted. Okay. And
were you drafted or did you?
Volunteer.
Volunteer. Was that the time of Vietnam?
Yeah, just about the time.
You didn't see action?
Artillery action, somewhat. Yes.
You were an artilleryman?
I'm a fire direction man in the artillery.
I was an artilleryman in the United States Army, but I was drafted against my will, and I was a terrible soldier. I don't know about you.
Well, I was a fairly.
I know how to fire a 501 howitzer.
Okay.
And also a 155.
You mean the 105?
105 howitzer. I was a gunner on that.
I was a fire direction man on the 155 self-propelled howitzers.
I knew that. Count off your numbers loud and strong.
Okay.
For wherever you go, you will always know that. No, that's the Air Force.
Yeah, no. You're thinking of the field artillery now.
Field artillery, right. Yeah. I also know, for instance, in case the barricades come up or something, I ended up the last months. I know how to drive an M48 tank.
Okay, I do too.
You do?
Okay, absolutely.
Well, we got a commonality.
We sure do. I say M-tracks, everything.
Yeah.
Artillery, because I was an artilleryman and before the age of the computers. So
yeah. And did you like the military?
I had a good time.
You did. I did. I had a good time because when you're 20 years old, you're always having a good time. But I didn't like the military.
It was a good learning experience.
I used to try and talk to sergeants and say, Sergeant, couldn't we do things a little bit more democratically?
No, that's not.
And they didn't want to hear that.
It's not a democratic outfit, I'm afraid.
I'm afraid I got democracy into my genes.
No,
which does not suit me well for this world, I would suggest. But anyway, so
You've done okay. You've become a producer.
Well, I've done that because there's a few little chinks and things you can get into and the things you can do around the system. But the system is still, I think, just vastly authoritarian. I still feel like we're more or less like serfs on a feudal estate, the bulk of the world population. But that's an issue we can get to maybe with Henry George.
Okay, sure.
But you got this company also, and you went to school. You went to university then.
I went to a little school in Massachusetts, called Babson College, and and also
got back to Massachusetts.
Yeah, for undergraduate, and also
link
attended.
Up with the family then?
Well, sure. I'm still friendly with everybody.
So when you left the family, it wasn't animosity?
No. It's just youthful rebellion, and
go west, young
if
man.
I can mess up my own life.
Yeah.
I don't need help.
May there be always youthful rebellion. I think it's essential
that.
Of the evolution of consciousness. But anyway, you went to school, university?
Babson College, undergraduate, and attended Northeastern, and New School of Social Research graduate. So in economics.
New school here?
Yes, that's correct.
And who did you study with there, if I may?
Well, Heilbronner was one of the guys.
Yeah. It's great.
David Gordon.
You studied with Heilbronner?
Sure.
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy.
Yeah.
He wrote that.
Ross Thompson, Ed Nell,
okay.
Anwar Sheikh.
Okay.
Well, sort of a different perspective. I went to a right-wing school and a left-wing school, so I think I got a good balance now.
Northeastern was right-wing?
Babson for sure.
Babson was.
Oh, sure.
Was that a religiously oriented school?
No. It's a school specializing in business, and it was originally founded by Roger Babson, who had forecasted the Great Depression.
Really, from before, yeah.
From before, so that became famous. So a lot of Babson graduates in CEO ranks today, and I just had a meeting today with someone connected with my company. Who was good friends with a classmate of mine, Roger Enrico, who was a former president of Pepsi Cola Company. So I just happened to run into an old friend of an old friend.
Worked with Donald, what was his
Don
name?
Kendall. Kendall, yes.
We did a program with Don Kendall.
Don Kendall's protege was Roger Enrico.
Okay. He followed Don Kendall?
That's correct.
Oh, wow. I didn't know who had done that. Don Kendall was a real player.
Absolutely, absolutely.
He was chairman of the board almost of the establishment.
Absolutely.
He had great Henry Moore statues all over the place.
He
was a friend of Henry Moore, yeah. Okay. Anyway, so that's all interesting. You've been on the right wing, left wing. Robert Heilbronner, we did a program, The Worldly Philosopher.
Oh, yes.
Great book, I think.
Robert Heilbronner, I had a run-in with him.
Okay.
And it went something like this. He said, Mazzone, I see you understand the material, but you're the most boring writer I've ever read.
Really? Huh.
And I was sort of insulted by that.
But
I got over it.
Okay, yeah.
He was a great writer, and
he was, yeah.
And at least he acknowledged. At least I knew what the hell I was reading and writing about. It's just that as a great writer, my style is a little ponderous, apparently, for him.
Ponderous, right?
Ponderous.
You don't know from the declarative sentence?
Well,
do you have run-on sentence problem?
Probably a run-on sentence problem.
A lot of dashes and parentheses.
No, I don't even do it. I just let it go.
I have a hard time with that because I just like James Joyce wrote a couple of sentences that went on for pages.
Yeah, well,
just went on and on.
I can sympathize with that. I never wanted to stop and take a breath.
Right,
right.
So. Or a thing occurs to you in mid-sentence, it's just a sidebar, so you have to put parentheses or dashes or something.
I was late on.
People want declarative sentences.
I was late on that, so I think I'm a little better writer today.
Anyway, you studied economics, apparently. Became interested in the theory of economics.
Well, the first book I ever read in economics was a book called Progress and Poverty.
Thank you, Mr. Henry George.
And that was a book by Henry George. I happened to read it when I was in the military, and I never forgot it. And
really?
And now I've probably read maybe in my lifetime 3,000 or 4,000 books in economics. In fact, in my factory today, they were all lined up. My whole reading for a lifetime is lined up, and I've never found a book that made more of an impression on me than Henry George's first book.
Wonderful. We want to get into that. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why. And then I decided, okay, now that I left the Fortune 500 gig, I said, okay, I have time to pursue economics. And I didn't realize there was a Henry George Institute in New York.
Okay.
At the time.
Schachenbach or something.
Schachenbach is the publishing arm of it. But so I looked it up and I said, okay, let me see if they've done anything new since the master, Henry George. So I enrolled a few years ago in some of their courses, which are free. And I went there and I said, my God, it's no different than the original textbook, which is okay, but I felt that it needed updating, and so
you're sort of a neo-Georgist.
I'm kind of a neo-Georgist, and after driving them all crazy there, saying no, it's got to be updated, because the Henry George Institute is basically, protecting the tradition of Henry George, and I think it's the right thing for them
Fair
to do.
enough, yeah.
But I think it needed to be broadened a little bit. So finally, after hearing my complaints and questions, they said, "Why don't you become an instructor here?" And so I am. So
that
I'm
way
teaching.
they can keep you corralled.
They keep me under control.
Yeah, that's right. They can keep you in harness and everything.
But they don't. They're
Yeah,
really
I
pretty
know,
good.
I know.
They're really pretty good at that.
Yeah, we did
And
a program a month or so ago with Kai.
Yeah, the director. He's the one that
Yeah.
hired me.
Yeah.
For Henry George.
Nice
so,
guy. They're going to become producers here, happy to say. They're joining the faculty here at MNN, where it's growing all the time. I think we'd like to corral you into that, too, so you can present your ideas to the broader public. But we want to get to those ideas now.
Well, I'm working on a book that to update and broaden the Henry George original insights. And I feel strongly about Henry George because I believe he's got the only viable answer to straighten out the economies of the world today.
Right.
Now, that's a sweeping statement.
Couldn't be more apropos. We're in the middle of it. It just went down about 300 points again. It's like a roller coaster.
Really, today? I didn't even pay attention.
As I left, it was down 300, below 8,000. All of that. We're in a terrible mess. Everything's come a cropper in a sense. The system has been hit upside the head with a 2x4 like a mule down in Missouri. We got the attention of people about theory, so we want to understand, and we want to understand not only theory, because we got theory all the way from Adam Smith, from Friedman to Marx to George and all that, but then also the assumptions behind the theory we might go into.
All fair.
And with that in mind, could you introduce to the audience Henry George, born and raised, his contribution?
Henry George was a newspaper writer and columnist in the 1800s, late 1800s. Born originally in Philadelphia, went to California to seek his fortune, and made some observations about the fast growth of this country that puzzled him. He saw great growth in great wealth, and he also saw side by side with great growth in wealth, growing poverty.
Right.
And growing poverty. And he said, how could this be?
Right.
Why is it that great wealth, in effect, breeds poverty? And he said, that goes around the world, and there must be some reasons for this. So he took a couple years off to study economics and try to come up with an answer. And he wrote a book called Progress and Poverty, which was his answer.
That's a classic.
It's a classic. It was his answer to it. And in fact, it was very influential and persuasive in the late 1800s, 1880, 1890. In fact,
Teddy Roosevelt?
So before that, a little before that, but it was so persuasive that he nearly became mayor of New York.
Really?
Running on a labor platform because of the popularity of his book.
Okay.
They say that he lost the election. The word has it that a lot of his votes were seen floating down the Hudson River.
There were a lot of dirty
compliments of Tammany Hall. Now, I don't know how true that story is, but the fact that a writer of essentially one book could have this kind of impact. He sold 2 billion copies of this text of his quasi-textbook.
Tolstoy picked up on him? Or
Tolstoy, oh sure. Tolstoy, George Bernard Shaw, many, Sun Yat-sen from China, many people around the world were very influenced by him. But a 2 million book sale in 1888
staggering
is amazing. And of course, a lot of people thought he was a socialist, but Karl Marx dismissed him as a self-educated economist with not a lot of great theoretical grounding.
Maybe we could stop there for a second and try and get the canon down, if we could, in a way, right? Because it begins sort of. I think it's fair to say you've got Adam Smith, 1776, Wealth of Nations.
First classical economist.
Classical. We want to get to that in a second. What is classical? What you had Ricardo. You had Alfred Marshall.
I would say John Stuart Mill before that.
John Stuart Mill is not always concluded, but he's a brilliant fellow. But he's included in the economic canon. Then you had like you say, Ricardo, comparative advantage, and Mr. Halberter talks about all this. You had Karl Marx.
No, you had Karl Marx.
Karl Marx, and then you had let's see, I don't know. You had Joseph Schumpeter.
All right, let's go from
Keynes.
No, let's stop right there. From Karl Marx, you had what is known as the marginal revolution, which is the basis of economics today. In the 1870s, there was a wholesale shift from economics that were supported by the labor theory of value. And basically because of the influence of Karl Marx, economics took another turn, and it really split into people who still believe in the labor theory of value, and then people who believe in the marginal economics or utility as a basis of value. And that kind of bifurcation.
At least Marxists I know, maybe there's some others, but they not only talked about the labor theory of value, but they talked about the surplus labor theory of value.
Well, that has nothing to do with marginality.
Okay. I didn't know Marx was associated with marginality. Or
no, he wasn't. He wasn't.
Okay,
he was a precursor.
Yeah, but let me make the point. But the point being in that is that the labor theory of value is that capital, or the accumulation of capital ownership or something, capital is it's all congealed labor. That's the labor theory of value.
That's
and
true.
that is human effort and human labor that creates wealth, and that to have it stored up in something else other than human labor, or some value system set up other than the labor theory of value, is something you say is new. You talk about marginal utility or where that came in, but you came and then you finally have Keynes, and then you get to
Marshall and Keynes.
You get Schumpeter,
Schumpeter's
the Austrian school. You get that. You get Van Hayek. You get Mises. You get that kind of Austrian thing, and then you get over, and then you get into things like Keynes.
All right, let me give you the timeline.
Let me just finish. Keynes, and then you get finally to. Well, I don't know, you get to Friedman, and you get to Friedman and the Chicago School, that sort of thing. And it seems to me, if I may, this I'd like to make a premise, and then you correct me, okay, or just set me straight. And then you get to, Henry George is in there at about the turn of the century, 19th, 20th century.
Okay.
Then you have another fellow I would mention, Louis Kelso. That would be off to the, maybe
30s,
outside
40s,
the paradigm, outside the canon. But they're all essentially based, and they all distribute income to the people through a labor relationship to the productive process for the masses of the people. And that the ownership of whatever this capital is, whether it's legitimate or not in a historical context, is always owned by a tiny group of people, whether it's in a communist system where it's nomenclatura, they have all the power and all the influence and so forth, or you have a capitalist class that owns the capital assets, a combine that creates wealth and so forth. But the ownership is always held by a tiny group of people, much like it was in feudal Europe, where you had lords and you had serfs that were beholden to the lords, and the power structure is based on that.
First of all, Harold,
am I wrong on that?
Well, let me correct your history of economics.
Please do.
And then we'll discuss why a small minority seems to be at the top.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, we'll go from Alfred. We'll go from Smith, Adam Smith.
Yeah.
And then the next serious economist after him is Ricardo, along with Malthus and Say at that period of time. Preceding Smith was the physiocrats in France. So I would say that was the first, first real systematization of economics. Then you have a great system.
Is that called classical?
Physics, that was pre-classical.
Marshall also.
All right, let me get to that. Then you get the great synthesizer of classical economics, and the end point is John Stuart Mill. About that time, same time, Karl Marx closes and really is the most influential of the classical economists. And he's so influential that there's a branching off of economics into marginal theory, and that's the Austrians and the English. Jevons, Menger are the people who developed the marginal theory to explain value, not in terms of labor, but in terms of utility.
Is that Schumpeter also?
Schumpeter is from the Austrian, but they come later.
Okay.
And then you've got from the marginal school, then you get another synthesizer, Albert Marshall in England, and from Albert Marshall, then you could probably say you go to Keynes, and Schumpeter was contemporary with Keynes.
Rivals, really,
Oh, they were rivals. Okay, you have that where Keynes kind of reverts back to a quasi labor theory of value in terms of having government redistribute purchasing power back into a system because of maldistribution of value because of the labor theory.
He was the one behind, after the Second World War, dealing with the Depression that had roiled everything, and set up the more or less modern International Monetary Fund,
Well,
the World Bank, and the Bretton Woods.
Let me get to that.
But he had his philosophy that informed. Mr. Nixon, if I may, Mr. Nixon in 1972
said we were all Keynesians.
Said we're all Keynesians now.
Let me finish up with Keynes. Keynes, of course, denied one of the classical tenets of classical economy, that the economies would be self-correcting. He claimed in a day of monopoly and rigid wages that wouldn't be the case. The government would have to come in and interfere. Also, as far as the international monetary system post-World War II, they didn't listen to him. They didn't listen to the American version.
So?
The American vision of post-war monetary setup was anti-Keynes, and they won out because they had the power. Keynes was working for England, which was the declining power. So they opted for a system based on American dollars being primary, backed by gold, World Bank, IMF, and all of that. But they didn't correct the problem of America ultimately devaluing from gold in 1970, Nixon's time.
Well, now you're bringing up something else, gold.
Oh, okay.
But we're talking about the labor theory of value as the theory.
Well, I'm just giving you
the assumptions behind the theory.
All right, I'm just giving you. I'm just giving you the history of the economics, just to follow what you said.
So,
and then then you have Friedman and Samuelson following Keynes, and then you're pretty much up to date today. Okay, so...
And my contention is the whole canon is based essentially on a system that is still reifying the labor theory of value, and the basic grounding policy statement for the United States is the Employment Act of 1946.
Which was...
And distribution of income. Distribution of income is universally accepted as being done through a system of jobs be created by people who own the capital instruments for those people to distribute income to them through their labor participation in production. My assumption is that premise is outdated.
Okay, let me first of all...
And there's no answer to it. I don't know where George fits on that.
Let me address the Employment Act was never really followed in 1946.
It is. It's still the basic policy grounding statement for the United States of America, and it's still in place. And that's all you hear Mr. Obama talking about, creating jobs. That's all they're talking about.
Never followed in any serious way.
What they're not going to do is distribute any ownership of the capital instruments that have accumulated through the process to the masses as a way of distributing income the way things are being produced is my premise. Where does George fit in on that?
Oh, I disagree with your characterization of it. But let's go back to...
Well, that's why we're talking.
Let's go back to George. George is a contemporary, a little later than Karl Marx, and he's a labor theory valuist, but he's got a different twist on the whole system, and I think that's where we can come in and discuss real economics as opposed to what we currently have. So,
if I may, what I'm
make a statement, and then I'll come back.
What I'm interested in is the thinking behind the theory of how an economy is going to be organized. And I've done a program with Polly. She's really good. I love Polly Cleveland. She's a Georgist and so on. And they seem to say they got, like when I think of economics, I think of two things. I think of capital and I think of labor. And the capital is everything that isn't labor. Now they bring in, when you talk to a Georgist, they bring in land as somehow a separate thing somehow, or natural resource based.
That's correct.
They bring in some, and they claim that's part of the classical thing. I'd like to understand this because I haven't understood it. But they say there's land, capital, and labor. And why the distinction between land and capital? Because it seems to me those things in reality and in most conception, those two are all contained within the same thing: capital ownership, private property ownership.
I disagree.
Okay.
I disagree.
Clear me up.
Okay. I totally disagree.
Okay,
it's true that they, in classical economics, they would refer obliquely to land, capital, and labor. But no one made a big issue out of it, even though they kept it separate. But let me get right to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter in economics. No matter what system, and I don't care if it's communist, capitalist, Georgist, or whatever, the heart of any economic system is who has the bargaining power. It's all about bargaining power.
Well, that's power.
Now the question is, how do you get bargaining power, and how does a small group of people get the bargaining power that ultimately makes them small and very wealthy? That's the issue that really transcends all of economics. It's an issue that
Okay,
nobody wants to discuss.
We agree, you and I agree, that in terms of the modern world, that in all the economies of the world, the individual private state, sovereign state economies of the world,
socialist, capitalist, all the same.
and in the world order itself, it is all the power and the influence is owned by a tiny plutocratic class.
But
and has been throughout all of history.
Okay, but let's.
Or do we agree on that?
I would say yes.
Is there ever a moment when there was real economic democracy,
okay,
or no?
Okay, but let's address the question of we can observe that happening, but the implication that you have is that some kind of evil group has conspired to get to that point. Okay,
not at all.
Okay,
it doesn't. I don't see evil.
It happens that way for systemic reasons. In other words, it could be anyone who could get propelled into that situation. Let's go back to, before I illustrate my point in a succinct fashion.
Please do, yeah.
Let's go back to feudal England. 1066. Here you have.
That was where Harold lost.
Okay, that's where Harold lost his eye. That's no question about it. The Saxon culture is kind of egalitarian in England. You've got a village yeoman farming situation. All of a sudden, a band of Norman knights come to England, encroach on England, win a battle at the seashore, and take over the country, and immediately put an overlordship of Norman barons over all of England, cut it up to maybe 20 different prefectures. And for 1,000 years after, basically, we were able to control the land and the wealth.
They conquered.
Oh, that, okay. So how did they get to be the 1%? They had a strong.
They had arms.
Had a strong left arm. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's right.
That's the traditional way of doing it.
And it still is.
Okay, but let's talk about how it's done today. Let's talk about Henry George.
That was a largely feudal system, and they had the assize courts, and they had feudal fiefdoms, and it was all based on the power was vested in the Duke or the Earl because he had ownership or control of the land, and the serfs on the land were like just part of the land.
Well, how did he get it? He got it by having a better left hook.
By force of arms. We're still living in a realpolitik world where the only thing that matters is power.
Okay, now let's discuss Henry George in the context of feudal England and current day America.
Okay, if you want to, that
all right,
way,
let's do it.
That's
I'm going to ask you to. I'm going to ask you to do a little mental gymnastics. Let's assume that you can visualize this area right here in front of us as encompassing the world. This geographic area. It's 5 square feet. Okay.
There's 97 million square miles.
Okay, but let's assume this is the world right here. Okay. And I walk into this circle, and I claim it. I make a claim. I own this circle. Now, this circle represents space, land, resources, oil, all of the natural, non-man-made elements of this planet. You with me?
Oh, yeah, sure. Land and the resources, the air, and everything. Yeah,
I make the claim that I own it. I got here first.
Yeah, and I've got the army to back me up.
And if you want to contest it, let's assume this little patch is America. In 1600,
well,
and I've got a land grant here. The Indians are, for purposes of this discussion, we're removing them out of the picture.
Obviously, we just conquer. We conquer.
Okay, but let's not.
The right of conquering is written into international law. We have to live with that because that's been part of history.
Now let's continue the analogy. This area, I own it. Now, you come walking into this world because you're born into it and you have no place to go. You come into my natural world. If you want to stay here, you work for me. Do you agree?
Well, you got a whole lot there going. I mean, you have no choice, really. It's just
power. Okay, you said it. I'm not putting a gun on you. I'm just saying you want to work in my world, fine. You work in my world, or you get out.
It's my world.
It's my world.
Right
there.
Yeah.
I
own it. Yeah.
There's the start of it. So you work, okay? You work for me, and at the end of the year, you make enough to feed yourself and me. Because why would I have to do anything? I own it.
Because you create surplus.
I own it. Yeah. I own it.
Yeah,
let's just say.
And you own the capital asset.
No, this happens to be unnatural.
There's no capital.
I
don't know. Those capital why is that not just considered a capital asset in the classical or the Georgia? Why is it distinct from capital the same way as an automobile factory?
Because capital is a man-made asset. What we're looking at here is non-man-made.
Well, you can own land, can't you, or can't you?
I just owned it by claiming
No,
it.
you claim it, and then it's done in the guarantee court, the court system. You have a title, you have ownership.
Don't get ahead of the story.
I'm trying to understand what's the distinction between the natural buyer.
We'll deal with that after this example.
Why is that not just part of capital?
We'll deal with that after this example.
Okay.
Let's follow along the logic.
Okay, good.
Where you're in there working for me. There is no capital in a sense. There's only nature and you and me.
Well, let's see. 1776 was also the American Revolution, and there was a virgin continent, and the only way, and there was no manufacturing, there were no factories, there was nothing like that. It was all just application of labor to that land, and it was very abundant. We had the Homestead Acts of 1862. And there was land galore.
We're not talking about that right now. We're talking about this one hypothetical example.
Okay.
Let's stay with the point, okay?
And that's the world.
Okay, that's the world for our argument. We're trying to see the basic logic here.
Okay, good.
You're working for me. You made enough to feed yourself and me.
You've got the power to assert your sovereignty on that piece of land.
Exactly.
And that's the nation state.
So you worked enough to feed yourself, or else you'd be dead. It wouldn't do me any good. And not only that, you made enough for me too. It's not a lush living, but we've survived here, right?
Yeah. Mr. Baumel said there was no growth from the Roman Empire to the modern era.
We'll get to that. All right. Now, the next year, I get an idea. I'm sitting around reading and studying. You're working, and I say,
got the time to read.
And I say, I hear you, and I say, I can improve Harold's productivity quite a bit by understanding some things I read.
Say, let's make this plow out of steel.
Yeah, and then I'll give you this information, Harold. Harold, I want you to do this, this, and this, and lo and behold, next year, instead of making a living for me, and you're making a living for 10 people.
Right.
Okay, and my question to you, Harold, how much of that 10, before it was 2, one for me and one for you, by necessity.
Okay, good.
Now it's 10. How much for you and how much for me?
Well,
and
I don't
why?
know. Well, the way it is, if it's still based on,
what else is it based on?
Well, it's based on power.
What else is it based on?
It's based on the ability to commandeer.
What do I get and what do you get?
Well, I don't know. They used to have sharecropping and things.
Forget
it was
that.
up to the power to determine how much went to who.
This is a simple model. What do you get and what do I get?
What's the point you're trying to make?
I want you to know who's going to get the productivity gain.
Probably the person who owns the plow.
Exactly.
Right.
And if you understand that, you understand all that goes on in the world.
Why make a distinction between the owning of the plow with which you plowed the field and the field? Why make that distinction?
We didn't even,
or the natural base. Why is that brought in? Land separate from capital.
We did not.
Because he has control of the land. He has ownership. They had fiefdoms.
We didn't even bring in the plow. You brought in the plow. The plow wasn't involved here.
Oh, that was the thing that was invented that made the labor more productive.
Maybe let's assume that you learned how to plant different seeds. I want to keep capital out of this example.
You want to keep it out. Okay.
All right. Would you agree that the split is 9 for me and 1 for you?
9 for the owner. Yeah.
Because there's no other way you can do it.
Yeah,
get off the land.
You've got the power to enforce it.
All right. Now I say, okay, Harold, I got an extra 9 here. I can bring someone else in, but I'm going to do with this someone else is instead of having him work the ground, I'm going to have him build a plow. Okay, I'm going to bring another guy in.
Yeah.
He's going to spend a year. I'm going to feed him. He's going to build a plow because I know that plow will multiply your efforts a lot more than the 10 times.
I see.
That's congealed labor, the capital in this model. But you see, it's man-made, the capital.
Okay, that's the
It's man-made, the capital.
All right, good.
Who has the bargaining power? This man, let's follow it along. The capital is now being employed. The man who has the capital, that has to be paid for and renewed out of the surplus in the system. So we pay the labor, we pay me all my rent profits, and we have to pay an interest factor on that capital, or else why would I bother to divert production and not have you replant or bring another person in to make 10 times? If I'm gonna divert production to make a plow, I've got to set aside some money for taking that money out of circulation.
And we call it capital. You have to accumulate capital.
But I'll call that interest.
But
nonetheless,
is part of it. Yeah, go on.
Okay, but nonetheless, the guy with the plow and you still ultimately have no real bargaining power against me because I own the natural opportunities and I can extract rent from that. All you can get is
wait a minute, rent.
Okay.
What do you mean rent?
Rent is the surplus over and above paying you
That's the
and the capitalist.
Okay, I'm trying to understand.
All right.
I'm trying. You want to make a distinction between. I still can't understand. Why?
One is capital is being
the
made.
ownership of that land. They used to have 160 acres you could get under a homestead agreement. You owned the land. You could even have the mineral rights. You could have the air rights.
Absolutely.
You have the ownership.
All of it.
Why is that distinct from the plow?
Because it's natural.
Because it's natural.
It's not man-made.
That's what I want to get. So the natural environment, we're born into a natural environment. On the earth, there's a lot of stones around. There's a lot of lakes around. There's a lot of rivers. There's a lot of this. And land. And there's land and everything. And that's distinct from things that we invent in extensions.
Exactly.
You want to make that distinction.
Absolutely.
Why?
Because, well, let me give you another
Why
example.
not? Because, if I may, let me follow through a little bit. The land now in the United States of America and most places within the world is owned as a capital asset. Ask Mr. Trump. Ask the other people.
You can call it what you want.
No, but why make
You can call it what you want
make the distinction?
Because in this little example I gave you, you can see all the bargaining power goes to the owner of the natural opportunity.
All the bargaining power went to the earl or the duke in a fiefdom.
Because he owned the natural. He owned the natural. He owned the natural elements. It's not the labor or the things made by labor that has the power.
They now own they then came to own the land. They own the land in an agricultural system.
But it's not only
it's
not only land in an agricultural sense. It's land in a location sense. The city of New
raw
York,
material.
and it's raw materials and it's oil, and it's the location of New York City.
Right,
all of this is a natural opportunity.
Right. Well, but New York City didn't exist when the Indians were here. They did. Land is part of the capital base. What's the difference? Why make that distinction?
Again,
he makes that distinction.
We make the distinction
because it has to do with taxes.
It has to
it
has to do with bargaining power.
Okay.
Strictly bargaining power.
Okay.
Sure. If you take New York didn't exist then, but because of the location of New York relative to Europe and the Hudson River and the Great Lakes and the Erie Canal, value was accruing to this location. If you owned the location, forget the agricultural aspect of New York City, you had bargaining power because you owned a natural opportunity.
Okay, let me take another example.
Go ahead.
You're doing it. Let's just say we've got an evolutionary process of which we're a part. About 3.8 billion years, forms were developing on this world. There was a natural order, came out of a big bang in the universe and all of that. And we get to a point, and 200,000 years ago, there appeared a unique species in terms of the other species that involved and have some say over the way the world's going to be operated, and that was called Homo sapien. 200,000 years, Homo sapien appeared, and they have a unique, and that's a natural order. You're born into a natural environment. It's all there, right?
Okay.
And everything. And they had a unique capability relative to the other creatures, let's say, of being able to extend their consciousness through tools and make the environment different than what an Eden-like sense is given.
Okay.
That's called technology. And it's the technology that is responsible for us becoming the top of the food chain and so forth. It's the extended consciousness that is ours. So that natural environment is there. You want to make a distinction that somehow the natural environment is democratic or something, I don't know, but it's the extension of the consciousness
let me repeat.
to deal with the things that are there, and it's the technology that creates the wealth and the way the capital is formed and the myths by which we live. And it used to be labor was really important on a ratio in terms of production. It isn't. It's probably only 10% of the actual production is done now in the modern age, as opposed to 10% was something other than labor in Thomas Jefferson's
let's go to square one. We understand
that. capital assets, the capital ownership, the capital, the technology, the combine that goes across the field with no driver, nobody, and we distribute all income to the masses through their jobs, their labor participation. They're like serfs on a feudal estate. The capital assets are all owned by a tiny class everywhere. That's why we're in trouble now.
No.
Contention.
That's not what's actually
Why are
happening.
we in trouble now?
Hold on, that's not what's happening. Let's continue.
We don't have supply and demand in sync.
Let's get to the example. You're jumping way ahead of the logic I'm trying to get across to you.
Okay.
All right. If you go back to that example, capital, technology, labor, that simple model is all under my control. So it doesn't make any difference how productive, how much capital, how much labor in that little world. I get the surplus by ownership of the natural opportunity. I don't care.
By ownership, not of the natural, by ownership of the technology.
Well, it doesn't make any
The
difference.
ownership of the capital assets, the capital stock, the capital, the owner of everything other than labor. And then they sell a bill of goods to the people that they will get some crumbs that'll come by those who are in ownership of what's creating the wealth in the modern environment. And that's why we're in trouble.
With all due respect, listen.
Okay, sorry.
Okay?
Go ahead.
Listen to what we're trying to say here.
Well, I'm trying.
The technology that's being employed in this little world and the labor being employed, that's all well and good. It's different. It's unique. You wouldn't get productivity without it. But at the end of the year, when they have to settle up, I get the fruits of that. They get enough to keep themselves going into the next year. That's the fundamental, and the capitalist there. And he only gets a competitive return.
He only gets about 12%.
Okay, I get the whole difference because of the position I have.
Now, who's the I in the I that you're talking about? The owner of what?
The natural opportunity here.
Well, the natural opportunity includes the technology or not?
In effect, indirectly, it includes the technology because I can bargain to take it. He can't take the rent I get. I can take the technology and the value developed from that he creates. I can take that. He can't take what I get because ultimately I have the bargaining power. So you see, who has the bargaining power?
The bargaining power comes because you have ownership.
I have the claim.
The claim.
Exactly.
Exactly right. And you have claim over the productive process.
Absolutely.
Right.
So,
and the accumulation of capital for future
See, Marx didn't have it quite right. He said, the claim he said came from the capital, and then he could extort or take a surplus value.
They do.
I would argue that no.
Okay.
I, as the owner of natural opportunity, I can let him, Karl Marx, use capital to create an excess surplus, fine and well, but at the end of the day, I will get it back from him because I have the ultimate bargaining power.
That's going to be through a political process of taxing?
If you
You're going to tax the ones who produce it and own the capital assets?
I'll get it back in rent. I'll get it back in rent.
Now, I'm getting confused. Who's I? Who represents the political forces
I'm
in
the owner of the natural opportunity.
Wait a minute. You talk about natural opportunity.
Yes.
What's the difference between the natural opportunity and the capital base of an economy? There's buildings, there's factories, there's transportation, there's roads. All the man-made stuff is the same as the land. There's nothing different. The natural order. That's the distinction we're making.
Not true.
Make a distinction.
Not true too.
My contention is that you got a field in Kansas. That's natural. You've got a combine that moves across that and plants and creates billions of barrels of, and they don't even have a single driver in there. It's done by an algorithm. All right, now wait a minute. They do that. That combine is a capital asset. The land is a capital asset. It's owned. It's all owned. And the people who own that are creating the wealth, and the labor contribution to that production is zero because you don't even have a driver for the combine.
Well, I disagree.
The people should own that combine as a way of distributing income.
All right, let's stop again. Let's follow.
We shouldn't have ownership of capital assets.
Let's follow the. We haven't got there yet. We'll get to that point.
Well, we've only got 10 minutes.
We haven't got there yet. If I own the natural land, location,
how about
oil,
the means of production?
Okay,
the means of production.
I own iron, steel, coal.
And a combine, and a factory line, and a highway. Why do you distinguish?
Hold on. Because to build that combine, you had to go through me to get access to the riches.
It's a history of nightmare.
You have to get through it. So that being the case, as soon as you build your combine and you paid me the rent to do that, you're competing with other combine operators, and your rate of return will be competed down to do a normal interest rate of return. Your labor will be competed down to enough to keep you alive, plus or minus some. But all the excess of productivity because of my claim will come to me.
Now, the claim you have is the claim that you own that piece of land, that the wheat field that you're growing.
Or I own the city block.
Or you own the city.
Or I own the oil well.
Who is that? Is that a landowner? Is everything real estate?
Well,
and the factories don't count?
They count.
Or how do you get to that?
But they don't count as much as the guys who own the oil, the metal, the agricultural fields. That has got the prior claim and everything else. Capital and labor exist and create but they cannot keep the surplus. The surplus will eventually filter down to the people who own the natural opportunities.
How would that be done? Through a system of reasonable and
competition?
appropriate
Competition for you.
taxation?
For you going to, as soon as you go to work and you start complaining about what I'm giving you, I bring another worker in, you'll soon agree to a reasonable compensation. The capitalist that comes onto my world, as soon as he says, I want more of a return, I'll bring another guy to make the same machine and compete him down to the interest rates. All else has to go to me, as long as it's a productive economy. Now, if it's an economy that only can produce just enough to keep itself going, then that won't work greatly. But let me give you some statistics that might give you an idea now. I'm going to go from the little world.
Trying to understand.
From the little world, I'm going to go to the big world. Okay.
Now we'll take. Okay.
Now we'll take the world of Europe and America, starting from the year 1200 A.D.
1200, not
1200 AD. I'm going to go in 1200 AD.
Okay, 1200.
Because from the year 1200 to around 1800, the productivity of the average person was a little under 2 times. In other words, the average person could produce himself and a surplus
for one other.
One other, all during that period when the printing press was invented, people were exploring new worlds and so forth. More or less, the productivity is the same. Then, somewhere around late 1700s, early 1800s, something unusual happened. The New World kicked in terms of oil and resources.
Yeah, they had an industrial revolution.
Okay, but they had it because they were able to combine technology with carbon and fossil fuels.
Thank you.
Okay?
Yeah.
That fossil fuel combined with technology from 1850, where you had 2 times productivity, all of a sudden in the next 150 years up to the present day, created something like 30 times the output instead of the 1 or 2. All of a sudden, 30 times.
Yeah, right.
But what's the and the population of the world.
I object to you using the term productivity because that's always connected to labor productivity.
Okay, let's continue the
argument. Call it productiveness of the overall system.
Okay, productiveness.
And you might be on why we're in trouble now because we don't distribute ownership of the real means.
All right, now, in the same period of time, the population of the world went from 1 billion to 7 billion.
Well, to the present, you're going all the way to the present.
I'm going right to the present. Now, all of a sudden, if we look at the world, level productivity and then a skyrocketing acceleration of technology enabled by carbon fuels.
Not just enabled by carbon fuels.
Primarily.
You're so based on simple historical condition of raw materials. That's only a small factor.
You had technology before that. No.
Small factor.
Take a look at energy.
In terms of the overall technological development.
Take a look at energy. 4 gallons of gasoline will give you the same energy as one of those farmers in the year 1200. So
we understand that.
All right. So Americans use 2,000 gallons per capita.
That's right.
Enormous energy is put into the system, enabled by technology. But if you took the carbon fuels out of this equation, that technology would not be enabled and would drop very rapidly.
Well, of course.
Okay. Who controls Who controls
that? A small group of plutocrats control everything.
They control the oil and all of that. So now, but the real issue comes. The real issue comes that from 1850 till now, 1 trillion barrels of oil were used to create this.
It's just a peak oil.
Okay, I'm going to give you a little peak oil.
I mean, it's so. Oh, go ahead.
All right. Then, if that were the case, if you more or less followed that theory, because it's non-renewable, there's only another trillion more or less available.
They've been
plus
saying
or minus.
That since the Drake oil field.
No, well, not quite.
We got natural gas.
Not quite. Okay. That being the case, if that were somewhat true, and we're going to decline in the next 30 years without the replacement, then the real fight is going to be, from here on out, who's going to get access to energy because it's so important.
Well, that's one little part of an overall economy. Why don't we get the economic system right, basically theoretical, so that we can then have capital formation and distribution of buying power, so we won't have a thing like we're doing now.
I'll tell you how to do it.
Why divide it between natural resources?
Okay, I'll tell you why. Because
that's the question.
Because I'm going to answer the question now.
Please.
Finally,
we only got 5 minutes.
If we take that little world I had, where I get the increase because
of my owner of the land.
Right. If you tax that rent, which is really unearned, and redistribute it to the people in the system, the system, I would argue, capital, labor, and everything would come into perfect balance over time, and
Why?
resources and because if you follow the math, because the productivity is not concentrated in a few hands.
First of all, you shouldn't use the word productivity. It's a dirty word.
Well, I don't know about that.
It relates only to labor. Why do we accept a system where the mass of the production and the trend of the world is for technology to create wealth? There are instruments of technology, including energy and so forth. Policy of how are we going to accumulate capital? So let us do what we're capable. Wait a minute, let me make the point. How are we going to accumulate capital so we can use technologically advancement to the benefit of everybody?
I'll explain it to you.
And it's done by technology that's creating the wealth.
That may be.
It's all owned by a tiny group. We do not have any ownership in the parts of the people because we see them as wage slaves that is going to be slaves to the people who own the assets.
We know all that.
Why don't we distribute ownership to the people
Harold,
so that you have supply and demand in sync? We wouldn't have the problems in the current world. I can't understand the distinction between land and technology.
I'm telling you, if you listen to me closely, you'll get your own answer. First of all, productivity is always talked about in terms of labor. But labor, whatever enables labor, you could put it under the rubric productivity. That's not the issue here.
I don't think so. I think you should call it productiveness of the overall economy. And its trend, the whole trend is toward technology, automation, technology.
We understand
not
that.
labor. And we distribute, notice, distribution
but
of income to the people on a mass scale is done through their labor participation only. It's sacred and it's wrong and it's making the problem.
If you tax what I just told you and redistribute it, the incomes and the buying power of both labor and capital will put this system in perfect balance. I'm making the assertion right out, flat out, and I don't think you'll ever be able to do the math to contradict me here.
Okay.
However, if I'm one of the few people who own that, I'm not in favor of taking my deal away. So I'm going to fight you on that. But the fact is, if you tax the rent from control of non-man-made resources,
non-man-made resources,
and redistribute it back to
you want to make that distinction. Okay, right.
And
pretend
redistribute
there's no technology.
Right. And the technology would be redistributed right along with it, because the fruits of the technology are coming to me owning the non-man-made resources.
Well, you own the non-man-made resources.
I get the benefits of the technology.
You not only own the non-man-made resources, you own the man-made resources.
By dint of the
power
fact,
structure does.
By the fact
and the people have no say in that. They have no ownership. They are
why
like
is that the case?
All
right,
because
why?
the labor theory and value informs all economic theory,
not
and it
true.
informs Mr. Obama.
Not true. Not
He's
true.
not got any idea to distribute ownership to put the people, democracy, in touch with the way things are actually being produced.
Harold, with all due respect, you're just sloganeering. Listen to me.
Well, maybe so.
Listen to me.
Yeah, okay.
If I own the natural opportunity, no matter how productive...
How about the natural and the human opportunity?
No matter how productive you are as a worker, I get the fruits of that productivity simply because of my monopoly position.
Yeah, but the wealth, the
we
labor
break
is
that.
not producing the wealth.
Well,
the labor is not producing
you have
the
to
wealth.
assume the labor is a key to it.
It is a small part,
hold on.
And it's made crucial in the way the thinking of that's a system we've inherited out of history that is outdated.
Okay. All right, Carol.
That's the point.
I'll give you any big factory in the world. Let me pull all the labor out and see how long that lasts.
Well, you can get a factory. All right, all right. The whole thing is skewed toward trying to create jobs. Yeah. You're going to create jobs for those people.
What I just said will do it.
That's the only way you have to distribute
what
income.
I just told you.
Because the poor devils have no ownership of the way things are actually being produced, whether natural resource or technology. They have no ownership as an income distribution
I just gave you the answer.
What is it? Some sort of thing
I just told you, tax the monopoly that accrues to none of it. That's all you had. No, you just tax the rent.
But I don't
it will work it. It will do it.
Okay,
that's
well,
simple.
Worth putting forward.
That's simple.
So what would you recommend to Mr. Obama? You got about 3 minutes to set this world economic
Mr. Obama
order
is not in a position to act on what I'm about to recommend to him. He's just not going to be able to do it. I don't think.
I don't think he can do it.
I don't think he can do it. But the fact is, if the world was in a situation where rents or monopoly were taxed and redistributed to workers and capitalists and no other taxes, this world will come into harmonious balance. You can trust me on that. I'll do the math for you one day.
I would like to get that.
I will do the math on you. I will do the math for you and prove it. Now,
and you can get a course.
what's the problem of that? What's the problem in implementing that? Well, in this country, for example, in most countries in the world, 1% of the population owns 70 or 80% of the wealth. Most of it is
Total wealth.
Most of yes,
Total wealth, including technology.
most of it, but most of it is derived from ownership of non-man-made resources. That gives you the lever.
No, it is
yes,
not.
it is.
No, it is not.
It gives you the lever.
Largely the result. Microsoft, you know, the combine is not non-man-made resources. It's the technology that is created.
But you're not listening to me.
To,
you're not listening to me.
Well,
the fact
I don't think you're listening to me.
I
with due
understand.
respect.
I
don't think you do.
I understand
and
exactly
I don't
what
think
you're
you
going to
understand me. Okay, that's
I don't
fair enough.
care how good you perform your technology on my little world. Whatever you create comes to me.
Well, that's because you've got a buildup of injustice.
Well,
James Joyce said history is a nightmare.
Hold it. We just answered the question. I don't care. Sure, the productivity is there, and you can show me Bill Gates. At the end of the day, he's on my world. I tax it from him. I take it from him.
Well, you don't do that unless you got the power to do it.
Well, that's the whole
And if he's got control
hold
of the
on.
market.
That's the presupposition. If I own... Let me take an absurd example. Let's assume somehow I was able to claim the air supply of the planet.
Yeah, right. That'd be
It's a natural opportunity.
Yeah.
I claimed it, and I developed a little device that I could put in the air and make the air sour and not quite good enough for you to work at full capacity.
You could own the world. They would have to all kowtow to you.
Okay, it's a natural opportunity.
Yeah, right.
If I own that natural opportunity, do I have to worry about who produces the technology? No, I take it.
Okay, so what
that's the answer right there. Okay, understand that.
Okay, I'll try.
The other is the same way. It's fragmented, and there's a piece here, and there's a piece in China. But when you sum them all up, basically it'll add up to the air supply problem.
Okay. Well, that's a big metaphor.
Now,
we're going to have to close on that.
Okay.
Is that a good one to close
That's a
on?
great one.
Okay, and I hope that you and Kay are going to get a course going over here at MNN University.
We certainly will.
So you can present some of these ideas because we want to inform the system.
I hope you're not mad at me, Harold.
Of course I'm not mad at you. I'm trying to learn, brother. That's all.
Okay.
That's all. Not at all. But we need something, and the system in place.
But I have to get you to listen better.
System, well, and vice versa, I would suggest.
Okay.
But anyway, the system that's in place is not adequate. The future requires we need a different, new system to handle the situation we're in now. We're in deep doo-doo because we're all enthralled to outdated ideas.
In the next 30 years, running out of cheap energy will bring this to a head.
Energy is one part of the overall equation.
Right now, it is becoming the most significant.
But you need a system that's going to allow us to utilize what we're capable of doing, bring new systems on.
I just explained a very simple one that would do it.
You got one idea about that? I got an idea. You got to get some ownership into the hands of the people as a way of distributing income demand to the economy because the people have to have money to clear the market that's being able to
You're going the long way around.
Not long way. That's the way.
The short way around will do the same thing.
Well, okay, maybe so. Anyway, you heard it here first, folks. You'll be hearing a lot of other kinds of more traditional things on the networks. We're trying to get at some sort of a thing outside the envelope thinking. Henry George is an important progressive force. I think Louis Kelso's got a little bit more down, and maybe Mr. Muammar Gaddafi, who you're going to go visit.
I disagree.
Muammar Gaddafi's more along the line of what the future really needs by distributing ownership of the means of production total, man-made and technological, to the people.
It's the long way
as a way
around.
of distributing income.
It's the long way around.
Because their work contribution to labor, the trend is diminishing to the vanishing point, and we have to have a system in keeping with what the future requires.
That's quite beside the point,
make
actually.
And it's all informed the traditional system by the labor theory of value, including, it seems to me, George. But that's my thought. Tune in. We're coming back in tomorrow. Andrew, thanks a lot for coming in. We've only just begun to talk.
Thanks for having me. I'll convert you soon. I'll convert you sooner or later.
Well, I don't know. We can do this. We can work this out. We can go and have a drink after and really get down to it. Right?
Okay.
We're off
the
air, so there's no point in talking if it's not being recorded.
Okay.
And we're running late, too.